So I'm going to talk about something a little bit like off topic, I would say, actually, from the session title. The session title is Architecture and Construction, and I'll talk a little bit about navigation and with a specific niche on aging. There's some link, but it's a kind of a loser compared to what Tobias is talking, and actually what Beatrix as an architect will be very much on topic. So I'm kind of in between talking about something that is use of virtual reality in specific, but also a little bit of mixed reality in urban environment about navigation and wayfinding. So the title, therefore, is Virtual Cities and Visuospatial Memory and Aging. I am working at the University of Applied Sciences and Arts, Northwestern, Switzerland. This has a campus with 5 locations. I'm in Brugg, in Computer Science Department, Institute of Interactive Technologies. And I have put also University of Zurich logo here because a lot of this work that I'm going to show you, because I will show you a research project and some outcomes from that project that has actually been done in University of Zurich, specifically with a PhD student of mine who graduated about 3 weeks ago, Ismini Lokka. It's going to be a lot of her results or results from her project, which we sort of work together. And then I also put the logos of InnoSwiss and SNF because the project that Ismini did was funded by SNF, and now I have another aging and navigation spatial memory related project through InnoSwiss, which means that, you know, this talk is publicly funded, or whatever you see here is basically the outcome is publicly funded research. So a little bit about me, because I'm the moderator of the session and I'm introducing the other speakers. I have to introduce myself as a speaker. So here's a picture of me in virtual reality. I never knew what to do with this picture once I obtained it, so I'm using it in this slide. As I said in the chapter slide, I'm working as a professor of computer science now, but I come from a geographic information science background, so similar to Toby actually in some way. And I have also an affiliation with an astronomy group at Harvard. It's a seamless astronomy. It's about scientific visualization of astronomy data. And this is that's not a mismatch at all, because astronomy is kind of like space geography, if you like. So if you're interested in spatial information sciences, it fits methodologically, just a different scale. And we discuss a lot of visualization methods with them. And then I've studied in Istanbul. Oops, sorry for the, I guess I'm using one version earlier of my slide, but it says Istanbul is actually supposed to be Istanbul, Turkey. And I added Finland to the other one. So I studied my undergrad, bachelor and master's degrees in Istanbul, Turkey. And then I went to Finland for a PhD in photogrammetry. And then I did like nearly 12 years, University of Zurich in Department of Geography, which is where I also know Tobias from. And then I serve as a visual analytics commission chair at the International Cartographic Association and AR/VR working group in IAESTE, which is photogrammetry and remote sensing. It's all geographic information stuff. And then I'm a council member with International Society of Digital Earth, which is a lot to do with mixed reality or extended reality, a lot virtual reality, I would say. So in one of my projects, or 2 of my projects, I have an aging focus. And the reason that I ended up with aging is because when you show things in 3D, apparently it may be actually stimulating memory to some degree. If you can name something, you remember it better. If you talk about memory and remembering things, you can't ignore aging, because aging is very much linked with, you know, memory deficits and decline, you will see. And the world population is aging. It's very relevant. When I'm 70 years old, we will be like 30% of the population, and I think we will never be able to retire given the direction of the population trends. So we better remain functional, right? So this is the current, more or less current, 10 years ago, people 65 and older. The projections for 2050, the red is where you have the highest number, more than 20% of the population is then over 65, and the projections by 2100 looks like this. I'll definitely, I mean, if everything goes as sort of expected, I definitely think that I'm going to see this time. I'm not very sure I'm going to be still here by then, but in any case, this is the trends, and it is not a small portion of the population. It is not to be neglected, and the technology is coming. And if the technology doesn't work for older people, if you're a company, you're losing a big part of the market. And if you're an older person or somebody who's getting older, which would be everybody, you should worry about being able to function with the future technologies and being able to navigate and have an independent life. Yeah, to make this point even further, if you Google for population over 60 globally today, you find that there's 962 million people. To put this in context, Switzerland has 8 million people. So you can see that this is the current population. This is 2017 numbers. And what is interesting also is that this is twice as large as in 1980. So it's doubled since 1980. And if you look at these numbers further with the age groups, population between 15 to 64 is going up, but population between 0 to 14, the number of new people are going down. So the pyramid is no longer a pyramid, the shape is changing, so it matters that we study. But also, it matters that we study because our cognitive abilities are affected. As you know, when we age, our joints are getting older, our vision gets a little bit funnier, we get some photoreceptor cells dying, we can't see shades of blue as good, or maybe some of us get our hearing a little bit worse, but this also happens with our brain cells. So what happens is that the senior moments are actually real, so short-term memory goes down from your 20s, quite linearly down, working memory, and long-term memory and speed of processing. So things are slower. So that's also why, for example, my learning German has been much, much slower than it has been when I was learning English, which I started learning at the age of 9. But okay, good news. So this graphic depresses everybody. So good news is that the knowledge-based, verbal knowledge. So wisdom is real. So the knowledge acquired through life remains, in fact, goes slightly up. So this is at least one good news there. All right, and one of the things that gets really affected is spatial memory. So you see, this is a title of a publication. It's very nicely expressing what I'm trying to say in this talk. Spatial navigation, a unique window into physiological and pathological aging. So it's healthy aging or unhealthy aging. In any case, the navigation is affected because one of the first things that seems to go down with the cognitive decline is spatial memory, the memory about spaces. So spatial confusion, especially feeling confused and disoriented in familiar spaces, is usually a red flag for our cognitive health. The question then, as a computer scientist who works with HCI or geographic information scientist who's interested in navigation, one of the questions is, can we benefit from these new display modes? And how could we use them so that we can actually help with this problem of navigation? If people can't navigate effectively, it affects their independence. It affects everybody else. It affects the economy at the end, because if you can't go from A to B and take care of your own business, you are going to need help from others. So this is one of the questions is, can we put the technology at the service of these particular problems so that maybe it actually helps? How should we design the technology so that it is actually helpful towards preserving a little bit of the memory, or maybe improving even? So this is, I like this caricature or comic drawing, whatever, is from Alice Rosen, came up in New Yorker, I believe. It feels like I'm actually walking, so the birds are trying the VR goggles, and we would do the other way around. But it's, for me, it's sort of say something about navigation, so I wanted to use this one. Right, so the thing with whether virtual reality or augmented reality or any kind of extended reality technologies would be helpful, if you look at the literature, there's a lot of work. So controlling memory impairment in older adults using VR memory training, or use of VR in rehabilitation, use of VR in cognitive training, or computerized cognitive training and cognitively healthy or unhealthy, like with mild cognitive impairment or dementia patients. So there's a lot of work. I mean, these are just examples. I wanted to give you this sampling from the headings. And what is found is these two papers, especially if you are really interested in this topic and want to follow up, I would recommend them. They are sort of systematic reviews, which means that these people took other people's publications and tried to put it together, what we really understand whether something works or not. I think the conclusion there is that it works. So if you can get a cognitive training paradigm using some sort of digital technology, computerized cognitive training, one way or another, it doesn't have to be VR, but it can also be VR or AR or XR. So what we understand is that it works if it targets a particular cognitive domain and by some repetitive training paradigm or a gamified training paradigm, it actually helps. It does either improve or slow down the decline, but there's still a huge problem with adherence, so people don't necessarily continue using it. They don't maybe understand that this is important. Maybe this is not yet a prescription from their doctor. I don't know. So in one way or another, there's problems about adherence. So the current applications, current computerized cognitive training paradigms seem to lack this addictive component, which we hope to kind of complete by our research to some degree. So one way of thinking about how to design extended reality displays is information overload. And this is something that is leading towards the project that I wanted to show you some of our findings. So there's this infamous inverted U curve. So you have like the performance. This is in this particular example, it says decision performance and amount of information. And if you have too little information, you don't make good decisions. If you have too much information, you still can't make very good decisions. Now, this is about, for example, making a choice. If you are shopping and if you have, I don't know, 5 items to compare, you are able to do it. If you have only one, obviously you have no other reference. So this is also perhaps a poor decision, but if you have 5 things to compare, you can choose one of the better ones. But if you had 25 things to compare or 100 things to compare, then it's overload. You can't handle it cognitively. So there's a limit to human cognitive function. But this inverted U curve it keeps coming back. There's always kind of a sweet spot where you have either it's just the right amount of information, just the right amount of objects to compare or remember or something like this. This also happens with stress. Too little stress, you might not be so productive, but too much might be also severe. It might affect it negatively. So performance and amount of things, like whether too little or too much, is a known paradigm. And information overload is interesting from the virtual reality perspective, especially because in virtual reality, the second part of the phrase is reality, which means that we want to show everything as it is in the real world. But as we will see in a few minutes, maybe reality is too much information. So this graphic I reproduced from this particular paper, also actually a group of Swiss authors here. So this is something that, how to link this information overload paradigm to our own research is if you think of visualization and how much information you want to show on a visualization, you have to remember that a wealth of information might create a poverty of attention. This is from Herb Simon. I think this expression is very nicely fitting here. What information consumes is rather obvious. It consumes attention. Thus, if you put too much information, you might actually lose people's attention. And attention is linked to memory. Attention is linked to performance. So how much information should you put so that you don't have overload in your information processing in the brain, so the cognitive load? One of the earlier papers from 1950s is called Magical Number 7 plus minus 2. And this is actually in the title of the paper as well. So you can have some limits on our capacity for processing information. You can have about 7 objects according to this study. It could be 7 numbers, 7 words, 7 pieces of visual information, 7 colors, 7 different positions for an object, or 7 sizes, whatever that you need to compare and remember. But more than that, okay, plus minus 2, depending on somebody's cognitive capacity, maybe more than that, more than 9, let's say, is overkill. It doesn't work. So this is at least the premise of this paper. A later publication, I'll skip this one. I just like the wording. It's a bit fancy. You can check the paper itself, that it just says that this number 7 keeps popping up everywhere for this person. So what a later paper found was that it actually might be rather in the range of 4 or maybe 3, maybe 4 plus minus something. So it, I think, depends on a little bit an individual's cognitive capacity and who do you test this with. That plus minus 2, so 7 minus 2 would be 5. So for some people, 5 is the magic number, and for some people it could be 9, right? So this is in psychological literature, it's known as individual and group differences or individual differences. So depending on, I don't know, sometimes you also have it in yourself, depending on the number of hours you slept the night before, you can handle a bit more or a little bit less, or depending on your expertise. So if you have done this particular kind of thing many more times, maybe you can handle it differently. Maybe then that is a 9 for you, but in another domain, maybe it isn't. But there's individual and group differences. So people differ in their cognitive abilities. A nice test for measuring somebody's spatial abilities, it's pretty elegant, and it is by a Swiss scientist called Piaget from who studied child development earlier. And I learned it from Lynn Libene, an American psychologist who gave a talk back when I was at the University of Zurich. It's called water level task. So you would show people a bottle, and you would say that this bottle was half full. So if I tilt the bottle, where should the water line would be? Where would it look like? So sometimes this is some unpublished work from my own studies. Sometimes people draw it like this. So this is how the water level would look like if the bottle was half full with water. And sometimes they draw it so, and sometimes so, and sometimes so. None of it is really explainable. The first one is perhaps, somebody takes the bottle of the bottom of the bottle as a reference and forgets that water is liquid. Perhaps sort of a oversight in thinking, but the others I don't know. Maybe this is the closest one, but it's not even so. But of course the correct answer is that it's always parallel to the ground, because water is liquid, and whatever you tilt, whichever way you tilt, it will always look the same. So people who don't do this test well, somebody who does this, who gives me the first answer, or who gives me actually any of these answers, they are also not necessarily very good at other spatial tasks. There's some correlation, so it can predict that you do spatial tasks well or not. So here's an example of that. So here's a task we gave a number of people back quite a while ago. The publications are from 10 years ago. So we gave people a task about a map reading task, for example. Here they would be finding some crime rates in Maine. So they would have to locate Maine in the US map, which they were told earlier. And then they would have to go to the legend and then read the crime rate and tell us what was the murder rate that year in 2000 in Maine. Now, what you're seeing with the circles here is their eye movements. So if somebody is looking at one spot a little bit longer, you will have the circle a little bit bigger. If the circle is smaller, that means that they have looked at there a bit shorter. The numbers express the order of viewing. So this is what you're looking at. It's a visualization of their eye movements. This person took 11 seconds to answer the question, and they looked at about 25 places. A fixation is an eye movement in which the duration is long enough for us to recognize the information. So it's a jargon word, but that's basically what it means. So in 25 fixations and 11 seconds, this person is able to give us the answer. And the same task, a different participant. So you can see this person took 521 seconds, and they have looked at 1,000 places, more than 1,000 places, what was the other one? 25. And here we have 1,181 places that this person is studying to find that information. It is just not so easy to see for this person. So they even went to the west coast of the US, even though they have been told where Maine was. So it is a complete and utter confusion. Of course, this person could have maybe been on some medication. It could have been that they didn't sleep the night before. It could have been that they just didn't pay attention in the right moment for the question itself, so they are completely lost. But what I sometimes say is to my fellow content creators, visualization designers, this could be you, and this could be, let's say, your client. So it's possible. So there are differences. If you test things on yourself, it doesn't mean that what works for you works for everybody else. Don't assume that. So this is an important lesson. And in design communities, it is known as designer is not the user. It's a kind of a motto people keep saying. So it's important to remember when you design something, whether it's a software, whether it is interaction, whether it's visualization, whether it's another product, a chair, don't test it only on yourself. Try to test it on other people as well. So to find a sweet average. All right, so let's get to the virtual cities and aging and see an example of these individual differences. In this case, we looked at virtual environments as memory training devices in navigational tasks. And you see Smini on the picture because, as I said, a lot of the results from this point over is from her hands-on work. We did the study designs, etc. together. It's a tight collaboration, but it is, I'm very proud to acknowledge that it is a lot of her work. All the plots you will see is coming from her PhD thesis. So what we looked at here is levels of realism, because we think that too much realism or actual high fidelity realism might be bad. So it might actually be harder to remember things. And the position of the information, so where would we highlight something? So we manipulate the scene content in a virtual environment, and we give people a task of route learning and navigation in a city. And then we look at certain human factors aspects, in this case, age-related differences and spatial abilities, a little bit like the water level task I was just showing you, but we used another test, and I'm going to show you some results about it. So we designed an experiment. It was a very rich experiment with a lot of different variables. So here, I know that this may be complex, but bear with me, I'll explain it in a second. So here you have the access participants. So we have been showing people, so these are people who took part in the experiments. We have been showing 42 people from this 20 to 30 year age group, younger age group. These are our baselines, so we want to understand how young versus older adults might be doing. And here we have a 65 to 75-year-old group, which is with 39 participants. And then here we have, in the other axis, we have the different kind of visualizations or virtual environments. I'm going to show you examples of each, but we have an abstract environment with no photo textures. We have a mixed one that we designed. It doesn't mean mixed reality in the sense that you think of HoloLens. It's mixed level of realism. So you have a little bit photorealism and a little bit not, you will see in a second. And then we have a proper photorealistic expression. And then we have three task types. We have spatial tasks, which are, I'm going to show you also examples of that. So things that are about orientation, and we think that maybe you don't need photographic information for these. And visuospatial would require both kind of orientation. Am I going north? Am I in the right direction? Or also maybe like, did I see this building before? So did I see this building before is visual, and am I still heading the right direction is spatial. This is how we kind of distinguish them. And the visual tasks would be that you don't need the orientation information. You don't need the direction and orientation. You would have to say, okay, I've actually seen this greengrocer before. I know where I am. That's all visual. Like you don't really need to have the GPS running, so to speak. So this is how we try to classify the tasks. We counterbalanced our group for gender, so there's sometimes non-gender differences in some of these things, and it's not what you think. It's actually much more complicated, but that's another talk. I hope to invite you next time. And then we repeated the test, so we also counterbalanced for expertise. Counterbalancing means getting the same number of people. So in each group, we had about half and half men and women, and half and half experts and non-experts. And experts were people who were either somehow studied or worked in domains that are related to geography, architecture, so spatial sciences, urban planning, things like this, or maybe graphic design or so. So we repeated this 1 week later also because we are going to give them memory tasks. And it's one thing that you remember right after you learn. It's another thing what you remember a little bit after some time has elapsed. 1 week later, do you still remember anything at all? So this is interesting, right? So this is like the second part becomes a bit more learning perhaps, because something that you can retain for longer than 1 hour. If you ask me what I ate for lunch today, I can tell you, but what I ate for lunch last Thursday, I can't tell you. I'm pretty sure I can't. I have like zero way of recollecting that, unless there was something special about it. So we measured people's accuracy, recall accuracy, how correctly they can remember what they have seen. There's as I said, a lot of variation in tasks, so there's a way of grouping them. And we looked at their confidence as well. So we had like, how confident do you feel about what you remember? Do you think that, it's like metacognition, is that what they call it? So you can say that, okay, I remember this building and I'm like 100% sure. Or you can say, I remember this building, I'm like maybe 80%, maybe I'm a bit wrong, maybe that building was or was not there. So it's something like this with the confidence. And then we, of course, randomize the order of tasks and visualization types, because the randomizing the order prevents learning effects and maybe fatigue effects through the experiment, because at some point, this kind of things, if you are measuring performance, it is important that you don't show things in always the same order, because towards the end, people learn things and they get better at some things, or towards the end, they might get more tired and they might start giving you more sloppy answers. So by rotating the order, you distribute such effects. So if there's such an effect, it will actually show, or it will be in every condition that you are measuring. So here are the three virtual environments. Here's a small video. So this is the realistic one, which we hypothesized that would be too much information. So this is built in City Engine, Esri's City Engine, some of you might know. It's a procedural model. It represents an average European city. It is fictitious. It's not a real city. But it looks kind of realistic. It could be on a grade A. We think that it represents the current state of the art for what the VR might aspire to do. And here then we removed, in the second option, where there's too little information, we removed all the photographic information. So this is what you would have to basically see, and then you will have some questions. Have you seen this before? I think I would get complete like zero accuracy in this one. And then here there's a designed mixed solution. So this is, now I'm going to also tell you the task. 1 second after I tell you how we designed it so that based on navigational theories, people pay attention at the intersections and at the direction of turn. So we textured those buildings and we removed the textures from the other buildings. We also left the roads textured because that was structural salience. Apparently that might help to build the two-dimensional road network. And the task that people were given, at least in like overview of it, was that you were sitting in a passenger car, a passenger seat in a car. Somebody's driving you from A to B. Of course, this was a bit longer in the experiment, the route. And then you were going to take this route on your own tomorrow. So try to remember as much as you can. So the learning or remembering is incidental, it's not accidental. So you know that you're going to have to take this on your own later, which means that you might be taking some mental notes in particular places where you think that it might matter. So memorize a route, that's what I said. So visual tasks would rely recognizing photographic detail. Have you seen or did not see a particular scene on the route with some fake images as well, which they weren't in there, that's the foils. And then visuospatial and location orientation and photographic detail, things like direction of turns at decision points. So if you show them a screenshot and say that, did you turn left or right at this point, something like this. And then spatial would be location and orientation, minimum help from photographic detail, like reproduce a 2D view of the route that you viewed. So you took this road, now you draw me a two-dimensional map, like a sketch, or comparing starting orientation to ending orientation. In the beginning, you were looking north. At the end, were you still looking north? Remember that they have taken a few turns, right? That would require for them to do this mental calculation, whether they still are facing the same direction at the end. All tasks are executed from the memory, so they see the video once, no repetitions, no going back to the video. So you watch this once and now you have all these questions coming afterwards. So visuospatial tasks look like this. So younger people, sorry for the quality, I think Zoom is compressing, or maybe I compress something, I don't know. But younger people do overall better. So this is the visuospatial tasks. Younger people remember a little bit more than older people overall tasks. And if you look at the immediate versus delayed, right after you have seen the video versus 1 week later, everybody's, there's a decline. So you remember a little bit less the week after. And if you look at the 3 visualization types, the mixed one is about 70%, while the others are at the 50 and about 55, 56%. So this one facilitates memory better. So this is the visuospatial task. If you look at the spatial tasks, you see again the same young and old pattern. Here the immediate delay didn't matter. It's the success is nearly at the chance level, so it's a hard task. But here again, with the mixed realism, you have a little bit of an advantage. It's a smaller advantage compared to visuospatial, but it is there. If you look at the visual tasks, which is all photographic, there the differences kind of disappear. This is in some way very interesting because here the age-related difference, for example, disappears because there's literature about how spatial memory suffers, but the visual memory is spared a little bit better as you get older. And these tasks are about visual only, so it doesn't rely on knowing your orientation. It relies on recognizing a texture. So therefore, it seems like the performance of older and younger are on par. And here also the type of visualization isn't so important as it is in the other tasks. So that is one outcome. And let's look at the visuospatial a little bit closer, because that's where you see like a huge difference, and the advantage is about 20% difference. So let's see what's happening here more in detail. So if you look at the young group that is on this side of the graphic, and you have the old group here. So you have the younger and older groups. And then you have the immediate and delayed. So in the top part, we have the immediate recall right after you see the video, and here you have the delayed recall. So what is interesting is if you look at the shape of the graph, this inverted U-curve is visible in all 4 different conditions we have been testing. So mixed realism helps younger people. It also helps older people. It helps 1 week later, both younger and older people compared to the other visualization types. So what's happening here is that you are reducing the information, highlighting the relevant information, and you see an effect. You see a very strong effect, in fact, because 1 week later, the memory decline is present in all visualization conditions, but the difference between 78% versus 70 or 63 versus 56, this is not statistically significant. It seems like I mean, it is the whole thing with the statistical significance maybe is a long discussion for a public talk, but in essence, what you're seeing is that what you retain 1 week later with the mixed realism or this mixed reality design that we have, we should have used a different word because now mixed reality really means HoloLens. I mean, like mixed photographic realism, lower level of photographic realism, but not completely abstract. So that one actually facilitates really, really well. So there's a whole thing to unpack and discuss here. I'm not going to go in there. There's a publication I'm happy to share with anyone who's interested. So we can discuss, you know, why is realism in some cases a little bit better than the abstract as well. So you can compare, you can make many different comparisons. But what's interesting is that this design solution that we have seems to really help. The way that we sometimes talked about this is that it seems to amplify cognition for younger adults and maybe serves as a prosthetic to the older adults, but it brings everybody a little bit up in terms of what they can remember. What is also interesting is the confidence data. I said that we asked their confidence. There's a known factor about older age and a bit overconfidence in memory tasks. And I think that it is because, and it's already happening to me a little bit, it's because it's easy to confuse, like if I'm in a classroom and then I am in another classroom that is somewhat similar and you ask me, have you been in this classroom? I was like, okay, maybe I mean, I think I have because it looks kind of similar. It's easier to confuse things. So here, what you're looking again is younger people here, older people here, and immediate and delayed. So week 1 and week 2. So when the value is close to 0, the people's estimated accuracy is matching with their actual accuracy. And if it is below 0, they are underconfident. If it is above 0, they are overconfident. So that's the U here, underconfident, and O here is overconfident. You can see the older participants with the abstract and with the realistic are considerably overconfident. With the mixed realism condition, the one that we designed, their confidence is close to 0, which is much healthier, which means that they are able to tell how well they have done with their recall tasks, with this particular visualization. In the other ones, they think they have done better than they actually have. So they think that, oh, I've actually learned something and I remember something. It's a false confidence. It's not a good thing. So here, 1 week later, their confidence grows with these 2 conditions, and the mixed reality still calibrates for having a bit more, understandable amount of, or a healthier amount of confidence. For younger people, they begin a little bit underconfident, and in the second week, their abstract and realistic confidence grows with these 2 conditions, and in fact, they get a bit underconfident with this one, which is the tool that facilitates best. So that's an interesting puzzle. We haven't quite been able to yet crack the code why this is happening. If you have any ideas, please let me know. But at this point, we are going with the comforting explanation that underconfidence is not so bad, because if you are underconfident, you might just train a little bit more because you think that, for example, the idea is here that did I learn my route and now can I go out in the field and function? And if you are underconfident, what you will do is you will watch the video a few more times. which is not such a big loss. But if you are overconfident and you go out and then you get lost, maybe there's some risk or dangers involved. And if you're teaching surgeons, it may be even more if they feel that, okay, now I know, I'm ready, I'm completely confident, which they didn't, you know, they should not feel that way. Right, so one more result from this, because I still have 10 more minutes to explain you things, and I hope you're not bored to death. So another task we gave them was to, like, you remember that how they were sitting in the passenger seat and they were going from A to B, right? And after that, we asked them if they could mark their route on a map. So we gave them the screenshot from the top of the VR, from the virtual world, and then they were supposed to draw some results from this. So they would be telling us that, okay, here I turned left, and here I turned right again, and here I stayed on the course, and then I went straight to my destination. So this was their task. This is also a hard task. And we linked them to each visualization type again, because here we think that there's something that might help them, because the textured buildings are marked, right? So here you have, again, too much information, maybe it's confusing, and here basically you have no clue. So this is the outcomes from that particular task. This is a particularly hard task. And you can, this is, I will emphasize this later. So first, general. So I said the slide title is slightly wrong, sorry about that. So you have, again, younger people doing a little bit better than older people. You have, again, some better performance the first week than 1 week later. Yeah, you obviously forget some. And then you have here spatial abilities, which I'm going to emphasize a little bit because it's interesting. So people with higher and lower mental rotation tasks. So here you have no, like all the age groups are together. I'll show you the separated version in a minute, but you can see that people with higher spatial abilities also outperform, just like the young and old difference actually, than people with lower mental rotation task, which is, I'm going to explain to you what it is in a minute. Here again, you have the mixed environment actually facilitate a little bit better. So let's look a little bit closer to that one, because I now said words that you never heard of before. So this is a mental rotation task. It's a little bit like that water level task, but more complex. So you would show people a bunch of cubes like this, and you would say that, okay, if this cube is rotated, one of the 4 answers, or 2 of these 4 answers are actually the same cube. Which one is it? And then they would mark, and you would ask them 20 questions. They could get 2 points per question. So you could see how well people solve this task, which means that the reason that it's called mental rotation task is that you have, in your mind, you have to be able to rotate something and see in your imagination, you have to see how this thing would look when you rotate it around, right? So this is the challenge with this task. If you are not doing very well in this task, you usually aren't doing very good in many other spatial tasks as well, but it's not all spatial tasks, it's in some spatial tasks, right? So you have to also not take these things as binary, you know, now I know this is an expression of everything. So here what happened when we grouped people with lower MRT scores and higher MRT scores. So we splitted the group sort of in the half, and then people who did less than half of the scores, they are able to obtain, they answered less than half of the questions correctly, and the others answered the questions more than half. So you have also age groups here. So what's happening is here the younger people are the light blue, and the darker people are the dark blue. And you also have immediate and delayed measurements, right? So what's happening here, if you look at the low MRT group, you have the younger people, this is their recall accuracy that correlates with their MRT scores. You have the people with lower mental rotation task scores, they are doing okay in the first week, and then they actually forget quite a bit, and their accuracy drops in the second week. This also is true, but the difference is not as strong for the older people. They are already not doing that great in the first week. You can see the difference, and then it goes actually particularly, it doesn't go particularly dramatically down in the second week. But if you look at the high MRT, which is where the interesting stuff begins, you can see that people who are old but have very high mental rotation abilities, their score is pretty close to the younger people in the high MRT group. And in fact, that hits a little bit in the same group, same level as the young people in the low MRT team. So here the difference wasn't statistically significant, meaning that You might be old, but if you train your brain and if you keep your spatial abilities high, which is trainable, by the way, there's also evidence for that, you can actually function very well. You can function cognitively quite close to the people who are like 40 years your junior. 1 week later, everybody forgot, and the older people forgot a bit more, which is to be expected. But nonetheless, it was an interesting finding in that case. So my last few words are about preference. Now, we talked about recall performance, accuracy. We talked about confidence, whether people understand how well they are doing. And then there's something called naive realism, which is linked to the preference of something. So let's say I am buying shoes and I prefer shoes that are not very comfortable, which is because I like the looks of it or something. So it's like preference doesn't always match performance. So in the visualization or virtual environments, people might like something, but it doesn't mean that it's the solution that is best for them. So if you just ask directly people, do you like it? Do you like to use this one or that one? And they will pick one, but they might pick that for the wrong reasons. So this is what this naive realism is about. In visualization, people like realism, people like 3D, people like interactive and fancy, but sometimes that's not good for the performance. So they don't always understand that about themselves. And this happens with the lower spatial ability people even more. So here is the results from that particular study we did. So we had these three. Before we did the experiment, we showed them these three pictures, and we said, if you were going to go for a route learning task, if you're asked to learn your way, which of these three would you prefer? And before the experiment, 88% of the younger people and 97% of the older people say that they would really prefer the realistic one. So there's an expression, a small expression of realism, we could say. And 12% of the young and 3% of the older people said they might use this mixed one, and 0% wanted the abstract. I mean, that's just ugly, silver, gray, who cares? I don't want to use that. After the experiment, we have now a shift in opinion. We asked them again. Now they have done all these tasks, and then we put this back and say, which one of the three would you prefer now? And they said, okay, so the younger people shifted a lot. So 69% of them are now like, okay, I'm going to work with the mixed realism condition. And 31% say, now we still like the realistic one better. Nobody still wants the abstract. So in the older group, we have also a shift. So now it's not 97% anymore. It dropped to 54%. So there's 38% of them still pick this mixed realism condition, which you have seen over and over that they do better with it in most of the tasks. And we have still sort of an overwhelming majority that still stick to their preference of the realistic display. And some 8% actually shifted to the abstract, which is another piece that I don't know why it might be happening. All right, so a few takeaway points. So, I mean, I don't probably need to preach that. Many of you quite intuitively understand that getting around, finding our way is important for our independent functioning, and it is not trivial, especially in urban areas. Now, of course, you can say that, okay, you are talking about a virtual environment where you can basically take away the texture. Can you do that with the real world? There's a bit of a possibility. You can say, if I'm using VR, I can do anything I want. I can change the height of the buildings anytime. I can remove some of the billboards anytime. I can put an extra one anytime. But in real world, if you're using a mixed reality or an augmented reality kind of paradigm, you could also highlight, right? You could also outline certain things or even mask some of the information. You could potentially suppress some information. That is something to be done very carefully, because suppressing information might be very risky in real world. So you would occlude information, right? This can be important if you are moving around. But if you highlight, if you outline something, or if you make I don't know, like that's exactly what the AR navigation systems sort of do. If you annotate the world a little bit, you might actually also help with the spatial memory. There's a whole discussion around this, though. Like if you help people too much, that was another PhD project by another colleague who was supervising it at the University of Zurich. Interested people can ask me and I'll point you. Anina Brugger's PhD thesis. if you help too much, that's also not good for the memory. So you have to find the right way of marking things so that it actually helps us to retain the information. If you're just following the blue dot using your GPS, you don't register any of the actual spatial features. So if you're using AR, you have to be also careful that you're actually supporting the memory instead of making it even poorer. But it is possible. So you can do carefully designed VR for cognitive training at home. So safe, it's a nice environment where there's no risks involved, and you can repeat the route many, many times. You can, train your mind to or attention, I guess, to some degree, with some guided VR training mechanism. So this is the kind of things that we are working on, cognitive training paradigms, also for unhealthy aging. I mean, this whole study I showed you was healthy aging, but there's also reason to work on cognitively unhealthy aging populations. But it is possible to also use XR and AR. And of course, given the confidence and preference rates, that people can calibrate their confidence to the better solution, to the information, the mixed realism condition in this experiment, and also their preferences, you see that they shift towards that. It kind of suggests to me that maybe the acceptance rates will not be too bad if we are attempting such a VR solution that is very deliberate and well considered and tested and adjusted for too much or too little information. So I'm going to leave you with that. Thank you very much for your questions and any comments. I'm happy to take them.
Thank you, Arzu. It was really interesting.